Welcome to the first emergency episode of State of the Stallions. This is your host, Luke Miller. And as you probably know by now, we got some really big news today that we knew was coming, but it's still really important to talk about. And that is the first set of training camp cut downs. Training camp this year was unique because, given the merger, they decided to bring 75 players into training camp. Just for context, last year the USFL only brought 58 to camp, so it's a lot bigger camp than these leagues have had in the past. And so, in order to sort of make this work, what they did was they gave each team about a week and a half or two to sort of let those guys get a shot. And they had some scrimmages on Saturday. And after those scrimmages, teams were forced to cut their rosters down from 75 to 58. So 17 players had to go, which obviously is a lot. And given that fact, there's a lot to talk about. And so thought about waiting until Wednesday for our normally scheduled episode to talk about this. But because it's sort of out there and I just got to get it off my chest, and some people asked me if I consider doing this, decided to go ahead and do it. So this isn't going to be a long episode, but just briefly kind of want to talk about the news, who's in, who's out, and give a little insight maybe into why Skip Holtz and his staff and Zach Potter decided to make some of the decisions they did. Not that I certainly know all the answers to that or to the questions you might have, but just want to kind of go through and talk about it. So let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so this is the Birmingham Stallions 58-man roster heading into the final 2 weeks of camp. At the end of those 2 weeks, on March 23rd, the Stallions will have to cut 8 more players and get their roster down to 50 men, which is what it will be for their entire regular season. But the guys that are a part of the roster currently will get 2 more weeks to sort of prove they belong. There'll be, I think, another scrimmage and that sort of thing in a couple weeks. And then heading into that last week of March, we'll have our final cut and our final roster as we get ready for that first game in Arlington. So let's kind of go through position by position and talk about who's in and who's out, starting with quarterback. I think overall, this is sort of what people expected. Of course, the former starter, 2022 USFL champion, starting quarterback for the Birmingham Stallions that game, Jamar Smith, is in. And then 2 new additions, Matt Corral and Adrian Martinez, are also in. The odd man out, unfortunately, is Jalen Morton. I feel for Jalen because he was on the team last year, and given Alex Magusses, he never really got a shot. Although Skip Holtz and other players had really fantastic things to say about him and his talent and ability. And then this year, Alex is gone, but given the fact that the Stallions brought in Corral and Martinez, and they weren't going to probably keep 4 quarterbacks, obviously, given Jamar's experience and his veteran leadership, it sort of made Morton, again, the odd man out, which, again, is unfortunate because given the way that he's been talked about, he's clearly an extremely talented player, a quarterback who deserves a shot, and would love to see him actually get some game time. He spent some time in the CFL, and that could potentially be a landing place for him after this. But sadly, given Corral's talent, Martinez being sort of a rookie with a lot of potential, and then, like we said, Jamar is the veteran presence. Morton, unfortunately, was the one who was let go today. And like I said, I think people kind of guessed that was probably going to happen, but it's still a bummer to see. And we certainly wish Jalen the best. In terms of running backs and fullbacks, this one honestly was a little bit, there was some surprise and some predictability to it. We're keeping 3 running backs, CJ Marable, of course, who's been the starter for the last 2 years, Ricky Person Jr., who came on really strong last year after he joined the Stallions midseason and really impressed, and doesn't surprise me that they want him around. And then the new addition is Larry Roundtree III, who we added, former 6th-round draft pick to the Chargers and has played some NFL snaps. So not surprising that they liked what they saw out of him. The fact that Bo Scarborough retired, he wasn't technically cut. He did retire a couple days ago, but the fact that he retired was honestly not terribly surprising if you've been following along during camp. Almost every piece of footage that's come out of camp involving the running backs, when Bo's been in it, he's been with his helmet off, sort of helping out with a drill or something like that, but not actually going through the drill. And Coach Holtz mentioned this at one point, but it's just pretty clear that I don't think Bo had been able to fully recover from his knee injury last year that sort of plagued him, and he had to have surgery. And he's I think about 29 years old now, so That's not old by any stretch of the imagination. But for a running back, they certainly don't always have the same life expectancy in football that maybe a quarterback or a kicker or some other player might have. So, really sad to lose Bo, not only because of what he could do on the field, but just because of the person that he is and what he meant to the team, the way he was a veteran leader in the locker room and on the field, what he meant in the community, all the community events that he participated in. Obviously, he's from Alabama. He played for the Crimson Tide, so it's really sad to not have him be on the team as a player. But I'm certainly hoping they can find some kind of role for him, whether that's a staff role or coaching role or just motivational speaker that leads the team each week in kind of some preparation. I think he's certainly somebody that you want to keep around the organization. So we'll see if that's the case, but we certainly wish him the best on his retirement and are excited for the next chapter for him, whatever that's going to be. And then the other one that was a little surprising was Bobby Holly, who plays fullback for us, was with the team in 2022, made the roster again in 2023, but unfortunately suffered an injury like Bo in the first game and was out for the season. As far as I know, I think he's healthy. I think he's recovered from his injury last year. However, my guess, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the tight ends, my guess is that given the fact that the Stallions were able to sort of have a really successful year and have a really, really good offense without that traditional fullback role being filled, and by using tight ends and some other players to kind of fill in some of the things that Bobby Holly had previously done. The Stallions have three really good tight ends, and my guess is that they maybe decided it would be more beneficial for the team to keep those three guys in the rotation rather than maybe to let one of them go and keep Bobby Holly or again, I'm speculating. It's not based on any information I was given, but that's kind of my assumption is that with Marcus Ball and Jordan Thomas, who have joined, who again we'll talk about more in a second. My assumption is that they can maybe sort of do some things that maybe Bobby Holly hasn't traditionally done or haven't traditionally been part of his game, but they might be able to also kind of fill in some of the ways that he has benefited the team in the past. So he's a fan favorite, great guy. Everyone sort of really loves him, and he's been with Coach Holtz for a long time. Played at Louisiana Tech, played with Jamar. So great culture piece, great person and player. Really, really sad to not have him be on the team. But I think after kind of the way they were able to make the offense work last year, it's just unfortunate. He kind of probably ended up being sort of an odd man out, and they felt like maybe they could move on without him. In terms of wide receivers, the surprise to me here was honestly just how few cuts there were. We have a lot of receivers, as you can see. I think we brought, I want to say, 10 into camp, and obviously I expected we would only keep maybe 7 or 8 of them. So I thought this first round of cuts we might see 2 or 3 get cut, but we only actually had 1 get cut, and that was Chris Lacey, who joined the team pretty late in the offseason. He's a pretty recent addition, and Chris Lacey, obviously great player, has spent a lot of time in the NFL, and I'm not exactly sure why, but for whatever reason, the Stallions felt like if they were going to move on from a receiver, he was the guy that it was time to move on from. So what I think will be interesting with this group is there's some incredibly talented players still on the roster. And again, given the fact that we have to cut 8 more, and given the fact that I think we currently have 9 receivers still, my assumption is that 1 or 2 more of these guys will get let go in 2 weeks when we have that second cut down date. And again, it's just a kind of a question of who is that going to be. So I'm interested to see, who sort of gets through to that final 50-man roster. And then, of course, be really interested to see who we see take the field and get the majority of snaps, because, again, there's a lot of talent in this room. Tight ends I already talked about a little bit when we talked about Bobby Holly, but actually no tight ends were cut. We have 3. We carried 3 last year with Jay Sternberger, LaMichael Petway, and Thaddeus Moss. But LaMichael Petway, in a lot of ways, played more like a wide receiver than a tight end. And I think Jordan Thomas might fill a very similar role that Petway did. So in some ways, we're not a team that I would necessarily expect to keep 3 tight ends under normal circumstances. But again, given Jordan Thomas's skill set, kind of like LaMichael Petway's skill set, it doesn't necessarily surprise me that we kept these 3. I think Marcus Ball is kind of a bigger body, more traditional tight end who certainly can still move and catch, but he's kind of similar in some ways to Thaddeus Moss So I think we actually have a pretty similar tight end room to what we had last year. Obviously, we know what Sternberger can do, but I wouldn't expect us, or excuse me, I wouldn't be surprised to see us potentially keep all three of these guys heading into the season, and maybe have Jay Sternberger as sort of the tight end one, but also have Jordan Thomas line up a lot, maybe as a receiver or in the slot running routes, and then maybe use Marcus Ball in maybe more blocking situations or goal line situations. Um, but I think those three all could really find a unique role in this offense. And then lastly, for the offense here, in terms of the offensive line, we came into camp with a lot of offensive linemen. So I believe we had, I want to say 16, 15 or 16, I think, or no, excuse me, to take that back. Let's see, we had 14 coming into camp. So 14 offensive linemen coming into camp again, which is quite a few, but this is obviously a position that's incredibly important, and you can never really have enough good offensive linemen. There definitely were some surprises here for me. I broke this down by position, but in terms of centers, Josh Sokol was the guy that kind of became the odd man out. He's a great player, spent some time in Minnesota. I wouldn't have been surprised if he made the roster, but one of the themes that we'll see as we talk about the offensive line is all of the guys that were starters for us last year, more or less, are still with us and have still been able to secure a roster spot. And that's not surprising given how successful our offensive line was last year, how much they gelled down the stretch, how good they were as we got into the postseason. So Cole Cabral and Cole Schneider were two fantastic centers, and Schneider played a lot of guard and other spots on the line at points last year, but they were both fantastic linemen for us last year. And, both got signed actually to the NFL in the offseason and didn't get kept by their respective teams. But, they're as good as anyone. And so it doesn't surprise me that we decided to keep them and move on from Sokol. And then at the guard spot, this is probably where maybe the biggest surprise of all these cuts came for me. Um, we kept Deontay Brown, O'Shea Dugas, Derwin Gray, and Zach Johnson, but we let Calvin Ashley go. And the reason that's a surprise to me is just because of how good Calvin Ashley is. He was an All-USFL lineman last year in 2023. I think a lot of people would have said he was one of, maybe some people would say he was the best lineman in the USFL last year. So he was not somebody that I expected us to move on from. Obviously we have not been at practices. We don't know what's going on with guys in terms of, injuries, chemistry with other players on the team, picking up a new scheme, showing up to camp in shape. I mean, again, certainly not implying or saying any of those things are true of Calvin Ashley. I don't know the situation at all. All I know is that he's a fantastic player. So I'm just surprised that we decided to move on from him this quick. Again, Dugas and Gray started for us last year and were both fantastic. So it doesn't surprise me that we want to keep them. Dugas, particularly, this will be his third year. If he starts for us again, this will be his third year starting on the Stallions offensive line. And he played for Holtz at Louisiana Tech. So he knows the offense, he knows the schemes, he knows what he's doing. And so, and then D Gray is a fantastic person and a fantastic player. Deontay Brown is, in terms of this list of offensive linemen, in terms of success at the college level and NFL, draft, how high he was drafted in the NFL and time he spent in the NFL, Deontay Brown, arguably is the most talented offensive lineman on this list. And so, I think he's going to have a huge role in our offense this year. And it doesn't surprise me that we kept him. And then Zach Johnson is another guy who spent some time in the NFL. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, and this is, again, a theme that we could talk a lot about for all these positions. There is way more talent on this roster than we could keep. And that's true for a lot of these teams, given the merger, given the fact that we had 8 teams in spring football, 4 from the XFL and 4 from the USFL have to dissolve their rosters. And given all the free agents, from the NFL or other CFL or other places that decided to come to the UFL, there's more talent available than can actually find a home or a spot on a roster. And so somebody was going to have to get cut. Again, I didn't necessarily expect it to be Ashley just because of how good he was last year. But, again, the coaches that are making the decisions obviously have their reasons. And, whether it was Ashley or Brown or Dugas or Gray or Johnson or whoever it was, I was going to be kind of having the same conversation because, again, the talent level is so high. But I am surprised that Ashley would not have been one that I would have guessed. He was the first one I saw on the list because it was organized alphabetically as I've organized my lists here. And you know, that was the first big surprise, first name I saw on the list, and was really taken aback by that. But I wouldn't be shocked if another team picks him up and he sort of lands on his feet because again, he's a super talented player, and it's really hard to find really good offensive linemen at this level, and he's one of them. So certainly, I'm cheering him on and hoping that he finds a new home, as with all these other guys who unfortunately had to be let go. But at the tackle spot, we got Christian Delario, Darius Harper, Matt Caskey, and Alex Taylor. Harper and Caskey were both starters at points for us last year. So again, not necessarily surprised that we held on to them. And then, Alex Taylor's a guy that's got a lot of potential, I think. And Christian Delaro is a guy that has spent a lot of time in the NFL, a very experienced offensive line, sort of veteran. And so I think, again, we're going to be probably seeing a lot of him this year. As far as the odd man out, Larnell Coleman, he was a guy that we picked up in the dispersal draft, sort of the super draft that happened from the XFL side. And great player, I think, just again, with 14 offensive linemen and having to let a few go at this point, kind of became the odd man out. And we didn't technically release Jameer Johnson, but I wanted to put him on here just because he was with the team as of a couple days ago. But with cut downs looming, Zach Potter smartly was able to leverage him into a trade. Jameer Johnson played for the Generals in 22, was a starter for them, I believe, that year. Came to the Stallions in 23 and was a starter for us most of last year at left tackle, but got injured towards the end of the season and missed the last handful of weeks. We actually let him go, we didn't protect him during the roster sort of cut down process that the UFL did after the merger, and then we did bring him back in that sort of super draft. And so I would say going into this, I kind of assumed he was sort of a bubble guy for us, but he's a really good player and a really good offensive lineman. So I'm not surprised that they were able to leverage him for a trade, because I think he certainly, if we had just cut him, somebody would have signed him because he's very capable of being in this league. And so fortunately for us, we were able to leverage a trade with DC rather than just cutting him and letting him walk. We were able to say, hey, this isn't necessarily the best place for you, but there's lots of other teams that could use you and want you. So we were able to sort of ship him off, and then, as we'll talk in a minute, get a linebacker in return from the defenders. But that's where we stand with the offensive line. I would assume 2 or 3 of these guys that are in will eventually be let go when it gets to that final cut down. But again, you can never have too many good offensive linemen, so we'll see. I might be wrong about that. As far as the defensive side of the ball, on the defensive line, this was, again, another room where we were just insanely loaded. And no matter who got cut, we were going to be left scratching our heads a little bit about why this guy, not that guy, that sort of thing. As far as who's in, we kept 4 kind of defensive end edge players. So, and actually 3 of them have USFL experience. So Carlo Kemp, who was with the Maulers in 2022, spent some time in the NFL last year, but he's back at the UFL level, and certainly really excited to have him. And then Henri St. Amour, who played for the Breakers last year and who we picked up in the dispersal draft, is going to still be with us. And then Dondre Tillman, who's been a starter for us the last 2 years and one of our best defensive players. Unsurprisingly, they decided to keep. The 4th edge player they kept was DeMarcus Mitchell, who played for the Patriots, made their active roster a couple of years ago out of Purdue. And I think everybody's really excited to see what he does on the field. So again, no surprise there that he's still with us. As far as kind of defensive end or edge players who are unfortunately let go, again, I mean, whether you sort of switch some of these names, I mean, we would be kind of surprised probably whoever was let go at this spot because we were so talented. But Owen Carney, a guy that we added again kind of late in the process, played college ball at Illinois and has spent some time in some different NFL practice squads and things. He was kind of a late addition, and certainly was excited to see what he could do. But out of the guys that we had, not a guy that I'm as personally familiar with. So can't say as much about him. Again, given that I know some of these other guys a little bit better, I'm maybe not terribly surprised he's one of the guys that was let go. But again, that's not meant to be a knock on the hall at him. That's really more due to my unfamiliarity with him and his game compared to some of these guys that have been playing at this level the last couple of years. The one that was really 2 that were bigger surprise to me. One was Hercules Mataafa, who really has been one of the best defensive ends in the USFL the past few years, in my opinion. I think last year he had the highest grade from PFF about edge players, and so I mean he had a game sealing strip sack against the Stars last year for the Generals. I mean he's got a lot of highlights from his time the last couple of years. So did not expect to see him be one of the guys that we released at this point. But again, like I said with Ashley, um, there's there's so much talent that this was bound to happen at some spots, and unfortunately, Hercules just was kind of one of the casualties here, and obviously, certainly hope that he lands on his feet somewhere and gets picked up by somebody else. And then Curtis Weaver was also a little surprised by Curtis Weaver, if I remember correctly, was a fifth round draft pick a few years back out of Boise State, and a really good player. A lot of people were really excited when we signed him. Um, Again, there's limited room here, and the four kind of edge guys that they've got are the ones that they felt either fit the scheme the best, or picked up on things the quickest, or just came into camp in the best shape, or again whatever the case may be. And there's certainly you got to, if you look at the guys they kept, you got to be happy with that. But it's also sad to see some of the guys we had to let walk. And then in terms of interior defensive linemen, right now we've got five. My assumption is we won't keep all five of these. That when we have that next cut down date, one or two of these guys might go. But right now we've got Carlos Davis, Jordan Thompson, Jalen Twyman, Marvin Wilson, and Willie Yarberry. Super solid group. Yarberry and Thompson have been with us for the last 2 years and have both been fantastic. Twyman and Wilson were both big name signings from this offseason, guys that were both in different, they have different stories, but similar stories in the sense that they were both at one point in their college career projected to be extremely high draft picks, as high as first round draft picks. And then because of injuries or COVID or other kind of issues finishing up college and this sort of thing, their draft stock kind of fell a little bit. And the NFL sort of hasn't panned out like expected for them. And so they're both incredibly talented players that are ready to show really that they belong in the NFL. So not surprised we've kept both of them, and really excited to see both of them on the field. And then Carlos Davis, twin brother of former Stallion Khalil Davis, who just got re-signed to the Houston Texans after a fantastic year in the NFL, after, again, a fantastic USFL season the year before that. So if Carlos is anything like his twin brother, it doesn't shock me that he's still on the roster. The odd man out, which, this one I think saw coming a little bit more, Caleb Sampson, again, kind of a late addition to the team, played college football at Kansas, great player, but, just given how loaded we were at this position, and again, his sort of late addition to the team and not quite having some of the same, college or professional experience that some of these other guys do. Unfortunately, he just sort of had to be the one that got let go here. At the linebacker spot, this was one where I think we all were interested to see what happened, because the Stallions, as it currently stands, had about 8 linebackers. They let one go, so now we're down to 7. But 8 linebackers is probably more than obviously they'll be able to keep. So we knew they were probably going to get rid of 1 or 2 people at least at this point, maybe some more down the road. But the question was who, right? Because they have just become insanely loaded at this spot. And so given that fact, the guys that are in, I don't think there's really necessarily any surprises there. It's just the one guy that was out, Traven Howard, did surprise me a little bit. If you had sort of forced me to pick a guy in this group that I thought would maybe be cut at this stage, Traven Howard would not have been at the top of my list. He's a really good player, played college football at TCU, played for the Rams for a few years. You might recognize the name because he won a Super Bowl, had a big play. I believe it was in the NFC Championship or at some point in the playoffs that helped them advance to the next round. And so, I mean, NFL experienced guy, Super Bowl champion, really good player. But again, for whatever reason, it might have been, again, a scheme fit, or, who knows? I mean, again, only the coaches and these guys maybe know. But for whatever reason, they just felt like the other guys they had fit a little bit better what they want to do. So no surprise that, we kept DeMarcus Gates and Damon Lloyd, Chris Orr, who, we spoke with last week. Definitely encourage you to go back and listen to that interview if you missed it. Chris is a fantastic player, but also just a fantastic person, and has a really interesting story, and is just a great guy to hear from, super likable, really, very well spoken. And so really enjoyed interviewing him, and if you missed that, I think you'll enjoy going back and listening to it. But no surprise that he's still on the roster. Come back and talk about Rivers in 1 second. But Elijah Sullivan was a good linebacker for us last year, and then of course Kiava Tizino, who came very close to being the defensive player of the year last year in the USFL, all USFL linebacker. Again, no surprise, he's still there. And then we all know Scooby, of course. Chauncey Rivers is an interesting one because he is the player that we traded Jameer Johnson for from DC. You might recognize the name if you follow college football. He actually was on Last Chance U if you've watched that show, and then he played at Mississippi State. So if you're watch SEC football, you might recognize him. He's played some in the NFL with the Packers. Also spent last year with the Houston Roughnecks in the XFL. When the Roughnecks when their roster was disbanded, he was picked up by DC, and apparently for whatever reason, just with all the linebackers they have there and this sort of thing, he was maybe sort of like Johnson was kind of on the cusp of being the odd man out with cut day coming. And so again, that's when the Stallions and the Defenders decided to make this trade where we sent them Johnson, who is a UFL, starting quality lineman, but who wasn't going to start for us. And they sent us Rivers, who again is a UFL quality starting linebacker, but apparently wasn't going to start for them. So sort of a mutually beneficial thing. The interesting thing to see is if Rivers is kept, through the next cut date or not. At this point, I'm sure they decided to keep him because they just traded for him. He's only been with the team for like 2 days or something. So I think the assumption was probably, well, let's trade for him. We'll keep him through this first round of cuts and see what he can do. And then, he may or may not be kept through the next round of cuts. So he's sort of, in a way, just starting his audition for a spot with the team heading into this next week of camp. And so he certainly has his work cut out for him with how stacked this linebacker room is, and these other guys having already have a week or two under their belt, and some of them multiple years in this system. But obviously they like what they saw in him. He's a little bit bigger body than some of these other guys. He's like 6'3", 275. He played defensive end really more in college. So he's kind of one of those edge hybrid players who can play, with his hand down or standing up. You can come off the edge and bring pressure. So, help in the run game, all that sort of thing. So he brings a little bit different skill set than maybe some of the other linebackers we have. So I can certainly see where maybe there's an appeal to bring him in and keep him, but he's definitely got his work cut out for him in earning a spot, as we mentioned. And then at the cornerback spot, I think, there was a little bit of surprise here for me, but maybe not the same that other people had. As far as who's in, so Ike Brown, who played for the Breakers in 22, was a really good cornerback, spent last year in the NFL. Not shocked that he's still with the team. Lorenzo Burns, who I think we all know well, this will be his third year with the Stallions after spending a lot of last year with the Browns in the offseason, or the USFL offseason. And then Neville Clark, who was, again, a great cornerback for the Breakers last year. Mark Gilbert, who was all USFL. Madre Harper and Chris Jackson, who both have some NFL experience and joined the Stallions this offseason. All of those guys are really good. As far as who's out, the one actually that surprised me was actually Mark Milton. Mark Milton is a rookie. He came out of Baylor, signed as an undrafted free agent with the Panthers, spent some time with them, but was cut, decided to join the Stallions. And Zach Potter spoke very highly of him when we spoke a few weeks back. If you missed that interview, certainly recommend you go listen to it. And I know that they really liked him and really liked the talent that he brought to the table. I think just unfortunately, when you look at the guys that were in, they're all guys who are relatively young, but also very talented and very experienced. Again, like most of these guys spent part or nearly all of last NFL season with an NFL team, whether it was, on an active roster, practice squad, or whatever the case may be. So some very, very good, very, very talented cornerbacks. And I think Milton, just given some of maybe his professional inexperience, again, just being a rookie, I think, unfortunately, just sort of ended up being the odd man out there. But he's got a bright future ahead of him. Certainly, it's a guy we could maybe see with the Stallions again down the road, or hopefully an NFL team will look at him, or maybe another UFL team this season. So bummed to not get the chance to see him on the field, but I know that the best is yet to come for him. And he's a great guy and a great person, so we're certainly wishing the best for him. And Terrell Bonds and Channing Stribling, I think some people were surprised by that. Personally, I actually wasn't that surprised. And the reason I say that is not, again, not a knock on them at all, but they were both guys that were really successful in the USFL in 2022. But they kind of had a regression in 2023. Bonds went to the XFL and didn't get quite as much playing time or success as he had in the USFL in 2022. Stribling was still with the Stars in 2023, but after setting a record for interceptions in the USFL in 2022 and being an All-USFL player, in 2023 he struggled with some injuries, didn't play as many games, didn't have nearly the success that he did in 2022. So again, obviously they're both guys that are incredibly talented, can absolutely play at this level and deserve to be on a team. But unfortunately, just kind of given some of how the past year or two has gone for them, and again, in certain cases, injuries or lack of playing time or whatever the case may be, I'm not terribly surprised that they ended up being the odd man out here. And Stribling, for example, is I think one of only a couple players that are on the Stallions roster that were pushing kind of close to 30 years old. I think Stribling's 29. I think Bo Scarborough is 29, and Scooby Wright I think is also 29. And obviously, two of those of those three are no longer with the team. And so I think some of these guys, especially this being a spring league, a little bit more developmentally focused or oriented, some of these guys that are kind of starting to get up there in their late 20s or pushing 30, um, you know, I, just the way that the Stallions have kind of run things and the way Zach Potter has kind of made decisions, it seems pretty clear to me that that is something they're conscious of. And if they've got maybe two guys that are sort of competing for a spot, but one's a little bit younger, a little bit more raw, has got some potential. They seem to kind of err on that side of things. So I think Stribling, I certainly don't think it was just a matter of age, but I'm not sure that necessarily maybe helped his case. But again, there's also obviously other things we don't know the whole story. I'm not basing these comments off of insider information here. Really, I'm just kind of off the cuff here, having followed the team, sort of sharing my own sort of opinions. But um, the fact of the matter again is all three of these guys are fantastic. They all deserve to be playing in this league. It's just they had some stiff competition in the Stallions cornerback room. This was an area the Stallions really wanted to improve after last year, so they went out and they aggressively kind of added people in free agency, and so it was tough to make the cut here. And again, you can see that by the guys that we still got. And then lastly, at the safety spot, didn't add anything for special teams here because we had one kicker, one punter, and one long snapper. So obviously they made the cut. But at the safety spot, a little bit of surprise here for me. As far as who's in, Bubba Bolden, Daniel Isom, Kenny Robinson, AJ Thomas, and JoJo Tillery. As far as who's out, TJ Carter and James Wiggins. Wiggins was with the Breakers for a little bit last year at the end of the season. Not necessarily a guy I assumed we would cut, but also not a guy that I thought was a lock. I thought he was kind of maybe a bubble guy where it could kind of go either way. And again, for whatever reason, he just sort of ended up being an odd man out here. The one that I'm more surprised by is TJ Carter. And the reason for that is, again, as I just mentioned, the Stallions were really aggressive in kind of overhauling their secondary this offseason. They kept very few players. As far as, we could go back to the cornerbacks here for just 1 second. And as far as if you look at who's in, only one of those guys was with us last year, and that's Lorenzo Burns, and including the guys who are out. I mean, out of those 9 guys that we brought to camp at cornerback, only one was with the team last year. So the Stallions were there's a lot of turnover in the secondary. And as far as the safety spot, we only kept 2 guys, JoJo Tillery and TJ Carter. And so given the fact that we moved on from a lot of players, but decided to keep Burns, Tillery, and Carter, I thought that those guys really had a good chance of either making the final roster or at least making it far into camp because, again, when they sort of overhauled the secondary and moved on from the majority of players, these were the couple of guys that they said, hey, these guys we can't let go. These are guys we want to keep around. And so the fact that TJ Carter didn't make the cut was surprising to me just because given the fact that they kept him up to this point, I thought he would be a guy that they would want to keep rocking with. But again, the guys that they brought in are very talented. Bubba Bolden, I know they were excited about him and trading for him. Kenny Robinson is arguably probably the best player in this group. He was with the XFL in 2020, then spent a couple years in the NFL. Would have probably been a higher draft pick if he hadn't left college and gone to the XFL. So, I think he's a guy we're going to hear his name a lot this year for sure. And then, Isom and Thomas, those were kind of guys like Wiggins to me, where it was like they were sort of on the bubble. I could see us keeping him, I could see him not. Some of that was just my unfamiliarity with them. Some of that was the fact that they were kind of late pickups in this process, but they must like what they've seen out of them so far in camp. And again, that left Carter and Wiggins to unfortunately be sort of the odd men out here. So there you have it, folks. This already went longer than I planned for it to go, so I'll wrap up here. But thanks for tuning in. definitely set a reminder. Wednesday morning, we're going to have another episode coming out on our normal schedule. Going to be interviewing one of those players who did make it through the first round of cuts and is still with the team. So you're definitely going to want to tune in and hear from this guy, I think. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Um, really excited about the group of players we have. Really saddened for the players that were let go. Obviously, again, as I've said over and over again, and I will continue to say, they were fantastic people, fantastic players, very deserving of an opportunity. And I'm really hoping they are able to land on their feet, whether that's with another team in the UFL, whether that's with a team in the CFL, whether that's playing arena football for a little bit, or maybe even being picked up by an NFL team at some point in the near future. So certainly our thoughts are with those guys, and we look forward to seeing what they do in the future. Some of them we might even see back with the Stallions at some point, down the road this season, even if there's injuries or other things. So it's definitely not the end of the story for them. But right now they're going to have to step away from the camp, at least the Stallions camp, and we're certainly saddened by that. But we wish them the best. But really excited with the talent that we got. Obviously, I think our roster is loaded. We're still going to have to move on from 8 guys in 2 weeks, but for now, we got 2 more weeks for these guys to prove that they belong. And then as those 2 weeks pass, we'll be into the season and ready for the first game in Arlington. So thanks again for watching. Be sure to continue to tune in and bring you all the latest as far as Stallions Nation. Hope you all have a great weekend and upcoming week. And don't forget, giddy up.